Mr. Craitor has moved second reading of Bill 67, an act to amend the Children's Law Reform Act with respect to the relationship between a child and the child's grandparents. Pursuant to Standing Order 98, the member has 12 minutes for his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak on this bill. I rise today in the legislature to talk about the second reading of Bill 67. First, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my co-sponsors of the bill, the member from Whitby, Ontario, Oshawa, and the member from Parkdale High Park. Thank you very much. I also want to recognize many of the grandparents who've traveled from across Ontario and are here in the gallery today, so I thank you for taking the time to come and visit us at Queen's Park. I want to say to the grandparents, their support for this bill has been unwavering, and I thank them for taking the time to come here today. Some of them, in fact, have traveled a great distance. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to talk about the bill. The bill amends the Children's Law Reform Act to enable the formation and the continuation of personal relationships between children and their grandparents. Something I think we just take for granted will always exist. It also sets out the needs and circumstances of a child that the court must consider in determining the best interest of the child. It adds to the list of needs and circumstances the emotional ties between a child and the child's grandparents and the willingness of each person applying for custody of the child to facilitate contact with the child's parents and grandparents. It is far too often, and it's certainly far often for me since I've been working on this bill for the last 8 years, that a couple separating or getting a divorce, and subsequently the relationship between the grandparent and the grandchild diminishes. In fact, sadly, Mr. Speaker, it may also be severed altogether as a result of extenuating circumstances or negative feelings as a result of the breakup. I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, and to everyone in the House and the people who are watching across Ontario, grandparents are more than just relatives. Grandparents are more than just relatives. They can be the mainstay. They can provide the guidance and security that children lack sometimes at home with or without a parent. They can provide support. Grandparents provide stability. They provide a sense of self to children seeking love and understanding. Grandparents are in fact the heart and soul of grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, it is so sad to tell you that more than 75,000 Ontario grandparents are denied. That's just in Ontario. 75,000 grandparents are denied access to visiting with one or more of their grandchildren. And Mr. Speaker, approximately 112,500 grandchildren in Ontario suffer from the known benefits of having a relationship between the grandchild and their grandparent. This can only damage future generations of our children. I want to talk a bit about the background of the bill and why I have been so passionate about this bill, and it's now numbered 67. When I was first elected as an MPP, one of the first groups that ever came in to see me in 2003 from my riding was a group of 12 grandparents. They came from Niagara Falls, Niagara Lake, and Fort Erie. And during my 2.5-hour meeting with them, I realized the problems that these grandparents were facing when they tried to gain access or visitation rights, or even in one case, custody of their grandchildren. I was personally touched by their stories. Thanks to their help and the help from the grandparents across Ontario, we sat down and felt the best way to bring attention to this growing problem was to bring forward a bill to this House. And I will tell you, Mr. Speaker, I've introduced it as Bill 8, then I reintroduced it as Bill 22, then I reintroduced it as Bill 33, and today I am hoping that this will be the last time that I ever have to introduce this bill again, that it will be passed, and it's now Bill 67. I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, Bill 67 has been considered in its own form in Yukon and 6 other provinces, including Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. And in Nova Scotia concluded that, like the current Ontario legislation, there is nothing in the legislation now that prevented access and custody from a child by their grandparents. But they said there was a real practical need to put into the legislation now to highlight the benefits of maintaining positive relationships with grandparents that their lives have been disrupted. I want to tell you some personal stories, and I have spoken with these people. I will tell you, in 8 years, I have probably talked to 4,000 or 5,000 people, at a minimum, and I've heard some of the saddest stories that would, if I had the chance to share them with you for the next 30 hours, you'd break down and cry when you hear what's happened to some of these grandparents and their children. As many members are aware, this is the, as I said, the 4th time, so I'm going to share a couple stories, and with their permission. Jackie from Trenton sent me an email talking about the last time she saw her great-grandson, the summer of 2010. Imagine, we're entering the summer of 2012. Jackie has not seen her great-grandson since the summer of 2010. He lost his mother to a violent murder when he was 6 months old. He lives only 30 minutes away from Jackie. She missed seeing so many firsts a baby goes through. She will shortly be 75 years old and cannot understand why it's been almost a year of fighting in the courts just to visit her grandson who lives half an hour away. There's something wrong with this picture. Terry Lynn is a grandparent who took her granddaughters to court, mother to court, for access to her granddaughter. It took a year in the court, and she was granted 2 hours of access every other week. Her granddaughter's mother suddenly packed up and moved to Whitehorse. There's nothing Terry Lynn could do. Her grandmother's continues to move back and forth from Whitehouse. Terry Lynn spoke to her lawyer and asked if there's anything as a grandmother that she could do. The lawyer said, you'd have to go up to Whitehorse. That's financially impossible, so she doesn't see her grandchildren. Finally, Donna from Grimsby told me about her experience with Madison, her first granddaughter, who was born in 2000. She was, in fact, in the delivery room to assist with Madison's birth and was allowed to cut the umbilical cord and was the first to hold Madison in her arms. Madison and her mom lived with Donna and her husband, Terry, for 2.5 years. Her second granddaughter, Caitlin, was born in March 2005, and her grandson, Dylan, was born in 2011. Donna became angry with her grandmother, her mother, and her husband, and made it clear that she does not want them to see the grandchildren anymore. And so she's been fighting ever since to have access and the opportunity to see her grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, this is just a selection of the stories that I'm sharing with you. Support. I need to tell you this. There's huge support for this bill. Grandparents in this gallery have taken the time to show their support. But I want to tell you, not only do I have support from each of the other 2 parties, and I thank them again for that, but I have support from the Canadian Association for Retired Persons. I have support for the Steelworkers Union, the Chatham-Kent Black Historical Society, CanGred's kinship support, particularly from Betty Cornelius, who has been with me since the beginning of the time when we worked on this bill, the Canadian Association of the Auto Workers. I mean, the list goes on. In addition, municipalities, towns and cities from Ontario have passed resolutions endorsing this bill, resolutions from Mississauga to Waterloo to Owen Sound to North Kawartha to Rainy River to Kingston. So I want to conclude, Mr. Speaker, with a few closing comments. First, Mr. Speaker, to my fellow colleagues that are here and those that are watching on TV, and to the guests, not only is there widespread support for this bill, but the passage of Bill 67 is crucial to help families across Ontario and support the young lives of our children. Our children do need and deserve to have family ties and bonds that grow stronger with them as they grow day by day. In fact, our children are our future, Ontario's future. And I'm telling you, we are investing in children, and we've invested in different ways, such as full-day kindergarten, our children's mental health. And we must continue to invest in our children and our families by supporting this bill. I believe families are the cornerstone and backbone of our society. We must ensure, particularly when a parental relationship breaks down and the relationship between the grandparent and their grandchildren has to remain strong and continue to flourish. That's what Bill 67 will do. I do want to emphasize the bill does not automatically give a grandparent the right. grandparent will still have to make the application to the courts. But I do want to tell you, I've actually seen court cases where grandparents under the existing legislation went to the courts, and the judge ruled that the grandparent had put together a very reasonable case and that it did make sense for them to have a relationship or the right to visit their grandchildren. But what the judge said was, there's nothing in the current legislation that directs me I should do that, so I'm not going to give you that opportunity. I want to share that with you because that's why the importance of changing this legislation has to be done. Children need a bond between themselves and an adult, and the mentorship is invaluable, and the unconditional love and fulfilling ever after that a grandparent can provide to a grandchild is something that is priceless. So I'm pleased to stand here today, ask for support. I'm confident, and you never like to presume in this place, but I'm confident the bill will pass second reading. The challenge is, Mr. Speaker, is to get it in the third and then to get it passed. This will be the last time that I will stand up in this House because I am confident that this bill is going to get royal assent at the end of this term, whenever it does occur. So I want to say thanks to everyone for having the opportunity to say a few words. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. For the debate.